Today, Rising Ground, a leading nonprofit human services organization, celebrates our 190th anniversary. 190 years of providing children, adults, and families in the New York City area with the resources and skills to rise above adversity and positively direct their lives. 190 years of growth, of change, and responding to the needs of the community.
190 years of creating hope and opportunity. During those 190 years, Rising Ground, like the city of New York, has evolved considerably. The story of Rising Ground is the story of New York, and the story of New York is ours.
Today, we are more than 50 programs strong at more than 70 locations across New York City and Westchester County. We touch the lives of more than 25,000 people each year. We help people address a wide range of challenges to move forward in their lives and thrive.
The work we do, like the city itself, looks very different than when we were founded in 1831. But since our very beginning, we've supported those most in need to navigate life's challenges and positively direct their lives.
For a homeless or abandoned child, the streets of New York City in the 1800s were a cruel and friendless place. Waves of immigration from across Europe, paired with the changing urban landscape of the Industrial Revolution, led to a rapid expansion of the city.
This brought prosperity to some people, but many were less fortunate. Children and adults who scrabbled for a meager mouthful, and in many cases, failed to survive. By the mid-1800s, it's estimated that there were 30,000 homeless children on the streets of Manhattan.
Some New Yorkers were concerned about the fate of these children. Mr. John George Leake, a New York attorney without children or siblings, died leaving an unsigned and undated will. This stipulated that his money be used to create a home for orphan children. His best friend, John Watts Jr., was tasked with the creation of the home.
A wealthy man and a public servant, John Watts Jr. honored the wishes of his friend. Before his own death, Watts formed a group of trustees to establish the Leake Watts Orphan House to foster, educate, and protect orphans. These founding trustees included notable New Yorkers such as the mayor, the city's recorder, and the leaders of several Protestant churches of various denominations. Among them was the rector of Trinity Church, of which both men had been members and where initial planning meetings were held.
The Leake Watts Orphan House was one of the country's first private child welfare institutions. The founding documents declared it would support the maintenance and education of helpless orphan children, no matter their creed or nationality. At the time, many of those we welcomed were considered less equal because of their nationality or religious affiliation. As the population of New York City has grown and evolved, so have the faces of those we support over the past 190 years.
For nearly a decade, the new institution was based near Trinity Church in what is now Lower Manhattan. In 1838, the cornerstone was laid for a new orphan home at what is now 110th and Amsterdam, an area then considered far outside the city. The Greek Revival building today serves as the Cathedral of St. John the Divine Choir School. The first residents, who moved in 1843, were 60 boys, described as full orphans, who were housed, fed, clothed, and educated. Some children went on to be adopted. Others were given apprenticeships to prepare them for independent adulthood.
In 1850, 20 girls were admitted. Children were housed in large dormitories with rows of cots. Cost of provisions was 10 cents per day per child, which went up 3 cents after the Civil War. In need of greater space and as the city grew around the orphan house, Leake and Watts bought a 40-acre farm on the Bronx-Yonkers border. The previous property was sold as plans were made to break ground for the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. Moving in 1890, the Yonkers campus was a tremendous improvement for the children, with grounds designed by Frederick Law Olmsted and a building designed by architect Charles C. Haight. With ample space for the children to run and play, it provided a chance to participate in normal childhood activities and gave them a sense of security that many had not experienced before.
By the early 1900s, care for disadvantaged children was evolving, and Leake and Watts was rising to meet newer, more compassionate goals. Expanding beyond our earliest days as an orphanage, we sought to provide for the emotional, psychological, and physical needs of those we serve. This laid the foundations for our increasingly multifaceted work that strengthens families and provides educational experiences to help children succeed.
In 1905, the grandson of John Watts Jr., General John Watts de Peyster, bequeathed Rose Hill Farm at Tivoli, New York. The land was soon used as a year-round residence for some of the children and as a summer camp for all, reflecting modern ideas of child development coming from the naturalist movement. In 1908, children of single parents, known as half-orphans, whose homes had broken up because of poverty, were boarded along with their mothers under Leake and Watts' care. In 1917, we established an ungraded class, a forerunner to today's special education programs, with a specially trained teacher.
2 years later, we held our first official grammar school graduation, although we had educated all children from our earliest days. The Leake and Watts Farm School was established at Tivoli for the older boys, training them for farm work. In 1921, an association with philanthropist Edwin Gould began when he gave the Yonkers campus our first swimming pool.
His beloved nieces and nephews were adopted from Leake and Watts during this time. Edwin Gould's Services for Children and Families was founded in 1923, but he continued to give generously to Leake and Watts. This relationship will come full circle nearly 100 years later, when the organization becomes a part of Rising Ground in 2018. In 1922, we began transitioning from dormitories for large groups of children to more family-like housing. Cottages were built to house 8 to 12 girls, with cottage parents. At first, the boys remained in dormitories, but eventually also moved into cottages and experienced the more individualized care that was the primary benefit of the cottage system.
A report at the time sums up life at Leake and Watts. Plenty of wholesome food, fresh air, outdoor sports, and a good time all year round combined to make the health record of our youngsters an excellent one. Adele Ross, a longtime resident of Brooklyn, has vivid memories of her time at Leake and Watts during this period.
I am 97 years old, and the thought of Leake and Watts brings back many memories. Due to domestic violence, the Ross family was falling apart. It was 1928-29. Mom looked for help and found it in Leake and Watts. They took the 2 boys and sent them to Yonkers at a foster home, and then on to Amityville, Long Island. They stayed together, and Mom was able to visit them from time to time. I was born with a deformed right leg. I believe it was the Edwin Gould Foundation that sent me to a hospital in Brooklyn, where I received a bone transplant. This was in 1928. I was 4 or 5, and I remember it well. I wore a brace for 2 to 3 years, and when the brace was removed, all signs of deformity were gone. Mom put up with so much abuse and violence. This was the turnaround for her and the Ross family. So thank you from the late Ross family and my mom for saving our family.
The needs for our services only grew as New York City and the nation entered the Great Depression. By 1930, we had 550 children in our care and a reputation as one of the most modern, far-seeing institutions in the country. In 1937, we opened a new social services department with trained social workers. As the field of social work came into its own, this put us in the forefront of providing therapeutic care to our children.
Henry Igov was one of the children who benefited from the opportunities made available to him while with us from 1934 to 1943, before a long career with the New York Telephone Company, retiring to Florida with his wife Irene in 1989.
I remember Coach Ludbach's football team that went undefeated and unscored upon, and the great athletics programs that were offered to us. Fond memory is of Prince, our German Shepherd mascot. I remember working to make the list so I could go to the Park Hill movies. and on a Saturday, marching up Broadway in the Drum and Bugle Corps to publicize Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland's appearances. I am thankful for the care, education, and friendship during my stay.
As stipulated by our founders in 1831, our work has touched communities of color over many decades. In 1886, the agency admissions philosophy was summarized by then Superintendent, Reverend Richard Hayden, as not discriminating over forms of religion and distinctions of color and race. In 1942, this policy was mandated for all child welfare organizations in New York City via the Race Discrimination Amendment. This formalized our longstanding practice of welcoming all disadvantaged children.
As the nation's attention turned overseas during World War II, the needs of the families here in New York brought more change. In 1944, a new foster home department was created to formalize the care of our children by families in the community. In 1945, we sold the Tivoli property as social services shifted back towards the city. During that time, our children began attending schools in the community to enable them to mix with their contemporaries. In the next few years, we entered a period of exceptional growth. Through mergers with the Orphan Home and Asylum of the Protestant Episcopal Church in New York in 1947, and with the Sevilla Hopewell Society in 1949, our service area now included multiple programs and many more children and families. Our residential campus also grew with the building of 4 more cottages in the next decade. By 1960, the social service staff numbered 30 members, an acknowledgement of the more complex issues facing our children and families as time went on.
Carolyn Page Henry came to Leake Watts in 1966, leaving an abusive past behind. Living in Gould Cottage on the Yonkers campus, she began to excel and earned a full scholarship to Howard University and became a dedicated teacher for 37 years.
It was my extended family at Leake Watts who took a young, angry, insecure girl and helped to transform her into a laser-focused, confident, respectful young woman ready to enter the real world. They envisioned a bigger dream for me than I could have possibly dared to dream for myself. For them, I am now and will always be eternally grateful.
In the late 60s, New York City Mayor John Lindsay formalized care for children and youth with the creation of the Bureau of Child Welfare. The forerunner to today's Administration of Children's Services, the government agency has had several names and configurations. As the city created structures, standards, and regulations that would apply to all child welfare, we worked closely with leaders to share our expertise in the field. Over the next 50 years, we would draw on our long-standing experience helping children and families in need and extended our expertise and resources to many new neighborhoods, new communities, and new populations. This new era has seen considerable geographic expansion. In 1979, we began to do even greater outreach into the communities our children had historically come from with the establishment of the East Bronx Family Service Center. By the time we partnered with Edwin Gould Services for Children and Families in 2018, our programs had reached all 5 boroughs and Westchester as we formally moved our headquarters to Brooklyn.
We have also seen considerable changes to our services and the populations we support. In 1971, we opened the Hudson View School, our first special education facility, a forerunner of today's Biondi Education Center. In 1997, we completed construction on a new building on the Yonkers campus to house the Biondi Middle and High School. And in 2000, we added the Biondi Elementary School.
In 1985, we were the first organization in the nation to find nurturing foster homes for babies with HIV/AIDS, becoming a national model. By 1991, 112 HIV-infected children were being cared for by 73 specially chosen foster families.
In 1986, 12 women at the Bedford Hills Women's Prison testified to their histories of battering and how that abuse related to their criminal charges. From this, Sister Mary Nerney established STEPS to End Family Violence, which is now part of Rising Ground's anti-gender-based violence program that focuses on prevention, intervention, and policy advocacy.
In 1987, we assumed operation of 5 early childhood centers, formerly operated by the Sunshine Ladies, who had been providing early childhood education to low-income families since 1926. In the coming decades, our focus on early childhood education and development would open new opportunities through center-based and in-home programs for children and their parents. Today, we provide targeted support by working with families to help children with special education needs, those exhibiting signs of autism, and families with limited resources to make the most progress possible in the most important years of development.
In the late 80s, we expanded our group home services to teenage mothers and their children, mirroring our early work supporting single mothers. We have since continued this work providing residential support for young adults aging out of foster care and for homeless and runaway youth, focusing on independent living skills for these vulnerable populations.
In 1996, we became one of the first human services organizations in the country to include juvenile justice services, as this field shifted toward a more therapeutic approach to address the root causes of delinquent behavior. Today, this work has evolved into a wide-reaching set of programs that work with teens who have been court-involved or who are at risk. In various settings, we work with youth to understand trauma that has led to past actions and work on positive decisions.
In 2004, we began to support children and adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And in 2007, opened our first group home in the Bronx for young adults with developmental disabilities. Today, we run more than 20 IDD residences that facilitate the most independent life possible. We also work with families and provide vocational and recreational support in the community.
By the dawn of the 21st century, the notion of an orphan was a distant memory. Government agencies and nonprofit organizations worked instead to provide children and their families with the resources and skills to stay together, fully integrated into the community and at home whenever possible.
Our bucolic campus that had once served as a safe haven for orphan children was giving way to more community-embedded programs. The nurturing environment we had built over centuries did lend itself to safety, recovery, and growth. And in the coming decades, it would prove an ideal home for distinct populations.
In 2009, we transformed our existing cottages and launched our Residential Treatment Center, a specialized residential program to meet the needs of youth with severe emotional, developmental, and behavioral challenges, and ultimately help them to live as independently as possible.
In 2014, we opened our Passage of Hope Unaccompanied Migrant Child program. Through the program, we provide temporary shelter for children who cross the border alone into the United States. Passage of Hope offers a nurturing environment for children after they complete a journey filled with uncertainty, trauma, and often painful memories of the homelands they left. We work to connect children and youth with sponsors in this country. In less than a decade, this program has evolved to address the many unique needs of these children, and it has grown to be one of our biggest programs as we expand into new areas of immigration services.
My name is Heidi. I am from Guatemala, where it is the tradition for girls to marry and have children at age 13. To escape that life, 4 years ago, I traveled for 59 days to reach the Mexico-US border to ask for asylum. When I crossed, I was detained in a very cold facility and after 2 days was sent to New York. In a short time, I was taken to rising ground at Yonkers, and for the first time I began to feel safe, although it was very strange to me. After 3 months, since I didn't have a sponsor, I was transferred to the foster home of Eustacia. She received me as a family member. In fact, Eustacia's youngest daughter says I am the younger sister that Eustacia never gave her. In June, I graduated from high school, and I will be starting at Lehman College soon. I took all my classes in English. I have been thinking about what Rising Ground did for me. It was an opportunity that helped me open my mind, and it helped me see what I really wanted in my life. I see Eustacia as my mother, but she is more than my mother, because she has done more than my mother has done for me. Oh wow, I'm going to cry.
Decades of expansion, both in geography and in programming, has created an organization whose work, reach, and impact bears little resemblance to the Leake Watts Orphan House. However, the same spirit to help New Yorkers overcome life's challenges and thrive remains alive and well.
To better reflect the multifaceted organization we have become, we changed our name to Rising Ground in 2018. To pay homage to our long-standing history, The new logo boasts our tagline, Paths to Positive Change Since 1831. We care for children, adults, and families and help them to move upward and forward in their lives. Whether it's providing aid and comfort to children on city streets in 1831 or today, providing unaccompanied migrant children a place to complete their journey to hope and opportunity.
At Rising Ground, we have given to New Yorkers for 190 years what our earliest founders had envisioned for children in peril. A chance to be children again, an opportunity to have enough food, clothing, shelter, and joy. A life without trauma, violence, and poverty. A rebuilding of emotional strength and trust.
Being a member of the community, valued and seen. Clinical, therapeutic, educational, and case management services to children and families. Opportunities for those we support to elevate themselves and support future generations. Rising Ground is a force for positive change in 5 boroughs of New York City and Westchester County. Our influence reaches out across generations and geography and points the way to other nonprofit organizations through our history of compassion and innovation.
We are proud of our 190 years of service. We believe it would have made John George Leake, John Watts Jr., and Edwin Gould proud to see what their vision has accomplished. Today, on our 190th anniversary, we are forever grateful for our alumni, our almost 2 centuries of loyal and dedicated employees, and the continued generosity of our donors.
For as long as we are needed, we will help those we support to find footing on solid ground and to move forward toward better futures.